I want to talk a little bit about, firstly, about people who have, because it's a people place, and all of my great experiences in engineering have been with other people. And I can't possibly do any of this on my own. So I'm going to start with my primary school teachers, Miss Newton, Miss Hughes, Miss Kennett, Mr. Evely, the football teacher, Mr. Price, who was the headmaster at our primary school. And this is us. I'm not actually in this photograph, but I was in the room at the time. Mr. Price decided that in 1967, he would set up what was called a closed circuit television system in our school, so we could broadcast to each other around the school when we were aged 9 and 10. Everything connected by wires. We operated all the cameras, we ran all of the sound systems, we did all the lighting, we wrote the plays, and it's just an example of a sort of mad idea that got legs. And out of that, I suppose I got a sort of sense of almost anything's possible. You know, who'd have thought that primary school kids in the mid 20th century could run their own TV station, but we did. So that was a good lesson from Mr. Price and all the teachers there. And I want to talk about a tiny bit about Duncan, Michael, who to choose. You know, there are so many people, but I've chosen Duncan as a sort of example of somebody who's super passionate about engineering. You can see he's talking about engineering here from the top left to the bottom right. By the time he gets an idea in his head, he's so convinced, he's almost throwing it at you. And he was my first boss at Arups. And he was also the person who walked me out of the door when I decided to leave Arups, more or less manhandled me out without letting me come back. And then later on, he became a trustee of the Useful Simple Trust. And when I phoned him up to say, would he like to be a trustee of our little fledgling organization? I remember him saying, oh, you're making me cry. He was so pleased, and we were delighted. He served as a trustee in our organization for 10 years. So I want to say thank you to Duncan and lots of other people, but he's just an example of somebody who's had a major influence on my life in a very good way. And his best little quote that he gave me is, and I use this all the time, it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission, which I think is a really good rule in life. Next one is Ollie Broadbent from Constructivist. And Ollie was a former student. He now runs something called the Regenerative Design Lab. And this is an example of somebody moving out of mainstream structures into something else and becoming a real influencer, seriously significant player in the world of regenerative education. And if you don't know him, many of you do, I think there's every opportunity to meet him in the coming years. And look up his Structural Elements song, which if you haven't heard it, it's online. It's absolutely hilarious. Projects. I learned a bit about engineering, or a lot about engineering, or everything about engineering from Salisbury Cathedral when I was at uni, with a guy called Peter Taylor from Giffords, who took me up into the roof of the cathedral, showed me around, explained how it all worked. He was the surveyor to the fabric. And I realized later on that the form of Salisbury, the form of the Eiffel Tower, and the form of this project, the Barcelona Tower, was basically, they were all very similar because they were following the same physical laws. And so we made this thing in the late 80s, early 90s for the Barcelona Olympics. Same height as the Eiffel Tower, built on the ground, jacked up that hollow concrete pole in the middle. Quite adventurous, I suppose, looking back on it. The Infinity Bridge in Stockton. So this won the Supreme Award from the structures. And I put this in here because we were so proud as a little company to win that amazing award for this project. And this is my founding partner, Sean Walsh, looking at a bit of steel, which he loves. But to be able to do something graceful in a community, to really influence the people there, and make a difference to their lives, that's something that I think is really important. More recently, we've been doing a robotically cut bridge, robotically cut, robotically folded, robotically drawn almost, called the Ava Bridge system and the Ava lift system for Network Rail. This is designed to enable people to get up and over the railway, including a plug-and-play lift, which comes on the back of a truck, ready to go, fully clad. You push the button and off it goes. Here's the demonstrator, which has just been finished, and our team working on it. But you get amazing quality of construction if you use robotic manufacture. Something about designing, which I've learned from the Royal Designers Summer School, which are an organization of loads of different designers, about the different ways that people design things. So the artistic way of working, the sort of more artisan way of working, and the more philosophical way of working. And I realized late in life that you need a bit of all of that amongst your team if you're going to have a successful design team. Making things, the constructionarium that we did with students 20 years ago now, so invented when we were at Imperial College, but learning how to actually respect the physicality of materials and try and use them wisely. Not making things, so trying not to use concrete, not to use steel if you can possibly avoid it. And this is our garden, not made. So this used to be a desert lawn, and 4 years ago we stopped mowing it, and it's now full of butterflies and birds and amazing grasses, just beautiful. And worm casts, that's a worm cast. And Tanya said, please come up with 3 tangible actions for collective impact. So here are 3. First one is to become a better specialist generalist, to join stuff together, to understand systems and join them together. Second one is overlay those systems and don't forget about natural systems. And lastly, when it comes to use of resources, focus on the critical mass of projects, not at the extreme ends and the glory projects, but focus on the place where the most resources are being used and try and do them as minimally and elegantly as possible. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And hand over to Paul.
Yeah, I love that you kept us to time, which was my only job there. So, now we're going to hand to Paul, and then we'll kick off the conversation.
I'm going to hit the start button here on my phone, just like Chris did. So I cut out at 7 minutes, and we'll see what sort of ring I get from mine versus Chris's. But thanks for the invite, Tanya and team, and for organizing this. I think it's a great idea. And I was reminded also of visiting Chris with my partner, Jerry Epp, at that time, who I enjoyed a wonderful 25-year working relationship with. Visiting Chris in his office at Arups back in 1994, and being very inspired with all the work he was doing at Arups there, and never would have thought that here we'd be in conversation some 30 years later, and looking at 40 years of practice and all the experiences we've had. But the conversation was also supposed to center, I think, around engineering with a purpose and with focus on people and planet. And I was asking myself, what is the overarching purpose? What was it back then 40 years ago? And has that changed in any way nowadays? And I would say, the principal goal still remains the same, like bringing joy to clients, bringing joy to people with the work that we do. And I think the more joy we bring to our people and to our clients, the more joy we'll experience ourselves. And so, when I look back now 40 years ago, how did that specifically manifest itself in practice, in our thinking, in our design approach? And I just recall 2 things back 40 years ago that were front and center. The first was just the design cost-effective, functionally workable structures. Yeah, that's sort of the obvious mandate. Focus creativity also towards cost-effectiveness and just sensible structure. But the other thing that, and I'll just actually share here a couple of slides. Yeah. So back 40 years ago, about 30 years ago, 35 years ago, this is what we entered into. It was like not just cost-effective structure, but also exposed structure. It just exploded in popularity. And this is, of course, Boberg here. And it just showed the bones to the whole world for everybody to see. And another example was Swindon here, the Renault factory back then, located in Swindon. And most of that exposed structure back then was, of course, limited to steel and to concrete. And I don't know how we view it nowadays. It's a question I'd like to have Chris respond to too in the conversation part of this webinar. But some may call it ostentatious and over the top, but we got right into it. We loved it. We joined the bandwagon too, and it was about like economical design, and it was about exposed structural design, and it's the structural designs that were recognized with awards too. So what has changed in the last 40 years, looking back on all that? And just a couple of points, and that is, firstly, we've got computational tools now that enable us to analyze in the most minute detail complex structural behavior. And we've got like just a whole load of hardware and software that we have to deal with and navigate through. And that can become quite overwhelming. And I'm reminded of the words of one professor who said, get to know the computer well enough so that you know what it can do, but don't get to know the computer so well that you never become a good engineer. And so that stuck with me. And hence I've never become really a computer expert, but I sure know what it can do, and it can do great things for us. The other thing is that the codes have just become overwhelming, and they've just gotten much thicker. I've got my, maybe you can see it here on the screen. There's my concrete codes, all tattered, and I still refer to it when I'm doing like concept design. It's just gotten much thicker, and it's become in some respects overwhelming. Everything we have to know now about codes, and particularly developing seismic codes over here in the west coast of Canada. And then the other thing that's changed is carbon has become front and center of the conversation in structural design. Back then, 40 years ago, we heard of carbon brittlement, but we never heard anything about embodied carbon. So that's entered the conversation. And then finally, I'd like to also remind us that wood has now entered the conversation as well. For many years, it was the exposed structure was all about steel and concrete. We have now got so many what we call engineered wood products available to us, so that we have like, it's like going from 2D black and white, if you like, steel and concrete, to 3D, three materials available to us. That's like 3D and Technicolor. It just opened up so many vistas and horizons for us to come up with interesting designs and utilize the various materials at our disposal. Also glass, plastics, fiberglass belong to that. We'll see where that all goes, but we live in glorious times as engineers. And so that's sort of what's changed in my view, some of the things that have changed in the last 40 years. How does that change things in terms of like engineering with a purpose? Couple of comments there. First and foremost, there has to be a continued commitment to cost-efficient, functionally efficient design, of course. And that means we have to avoid over-design. We can talk about that a bit in the panel discussion, but my sense is that we lean a little bit too much towards over-design as we're designing structures. I'd be happy to share some specific examples later on. But yeah, that's one comment, keeping our eye on the ball of cost-efficient design and not over-designing. I think we have to begin to speak more directly into the architectural conversation when it comes to carbon reduction. Is cost reduction. Normally cost reduction means carbon reduction as well. Carbon used to be outside of the conversation. Now it's in the conversation. But when we talk about transfer girders, when we talk about large cantilevers coming off of buildings, out of buildings, or just off of buildings, I just think we have to become more involved in reminding ourselves and reminding our clients that there's carbon implications of some of these big moves when we try and minimize the number of columns in buildings. And then also like the holistic design approach. I think if we're going to be designing in a purposeful way as engineers, we have to be engaged not just as number crunchers, if you like, but we want to look at the holistic aspects of the design. And I love this example of the Grandview Heights Aquatic Center, where we use this catenary roof design, and what it resulted in was 20% cost reduction here, or volume reduction, and 20% envelope reduction as well. And so just thinking holistically into the conversation and trying to get structure to do 2D, 3D, twofold and threefold functional work in a building, not just looking at it from a load carrying point of view, but also looking at the aesthetic implications, mechanical, electrical implications, what happens with that. So I said I'd cut out after 7 minutes. I didn't think I'd be cut that short, but why don't we just cut out here then, and we'll get into conversation, and we can maybe reference some of these other things a little bit later on. So I'll just stop here, and we'll just turn it back to Tanya. All right.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Really interesting. What we're going to do now is have a little bit of a conversation between Paul and Chris, but Paul, what I'm going to do is just throw you the first question. And then please, for the audience, keep your questions coming in. We've got a couple of great questions. Thank you, Matt Wyatt, our past president, for kicking off the questions. And so we'll spend about the last 20-25 minutes with audience questions. So, Paul, I'll ask you the first question, and we can come back to Chris. In terms of, one of the things that I see as common in many gold medalists, but particularly in conversations I had with you and Chris leading up to this, is this word we use in terms of creativity and innovation in engineering. And I think that can mean so many different things to different people. As I said in the beginning, my view is that it's a mindset and something that can be learned. What do you think it is about your work that has integrated in, Chris, I'm going to come to you next. I'm just asking a question about innovation and creativity for both of you. As gold medalists, what do you think it is about that word innovation and the application creativity that has led you to become gold medalists and sort of some of the top engineers in the world in terms of the recognition of who you are and your contribution to the profession? And I know that we all like to be humble, but I think in terms of inspiring other people, that insight into how that manifests, I think is really interesting. So, Paul, why don't you kick us off then, Chris, and then I'll give you each an opportunity to ask each other a question.
Yeah. Thanks, Tanya. That's a very good question. And when I asked myself early in my career too, what does it take to be creative? What do you actually do? And I think at the core of it all, and interested in seeing how Chris thinks about that too, of course, it's just like almost like an insatiable desire to not be satisfied with the same old. Always sort of like sniffing around, saying, is there something different we can do here? Is there something? There's nothing new under the sun per se, but you can still build on and build off the shoulders of others and what has been done. And there's always new nuances, if you like, new little paths that you can take to come up with new ways of doing things. But it all begins with just don't be satisfied with the same old. Always ask the question: is there something different we can do? And we're also often just saying, well, there's not just two materials out there, concrete and steel. We have wood in the toolbox, plenty of other ones. Let's just take the best of every material and bring it to the table and let it contribute its particular strength, its distinctive strength to the design conversation. That's this is a sort of this double duty, triple duty, quadruple duty of structural performance too. Where you're looking at different materials and seeing can they maybe conceal mechanical, electrical functions? Can they act acoustically? Can they of course support the structural loads? Can they do aesthetic work? Just asking those questions and exploring, and that would sort of be my thought about that.
That's great. Thank you. How about you, Chris?
I would. I'm going to say I learned a lot by going traveling, which was to do with sort of resourcefulness and just the use of stuff locally. So I did quite a lot of time in around Southeast Asia and India and all that sort of stuff. About a year or two of that. And when you see people able to develop their own way of doing things, using their own materials, and really tuned into the environment, and then it becomes part of the culture. Then I find that really inspiring. And I think I didn't actually do that big trip until I was about 27 years old. And I wish I'd done it earlier, but that was a major influence on the way that I found myself thinking afterwards. Because when you see stone being used in Salisbury Cathedral, for example, in this country, and then you see it being used in Rajasthan, and then you see it being used in somewhere over in Indonesia, and then you see timber being used because it's all they have in the jungle to make longhouses, which are orientated in a particular way, which are lifted off the ground because of the flooding, to protect against insects and creepy crawlies, all that sort of stuff. You start to go, oh, well, this is all about imagination and using very simple things, really, a piece of stone or a piece of wood. And you come up with this just amazing tuned in set of answers. And it just keeps on evolving. You know, people are fascinated by just making things a bit better, so it's that. I would say going traveling and really sort of absorbing that for a year had this major, it made me think much more about the environment and much more about materials than I had done up to that point.
I love that. Yeah, having just come back from Hong Kong and wishing I knew more about bamboo scaffolding, I think that's a great example of just, you know, the ingenuity of using local materials. Thank you. So now there's an opportunity for each of you to ask the other person a question, and then we'll go into audience questions. So who would like to kick off?
Yeah, I'll kick off with Chris here. Chris, I'm curious, like, you know, what your thought is about some of the 70s, 80s, and 90s architecture, you know, just sort of like out there, almost like in your face, you know, structure, which we did a bunch of too. Yeah, you know, given the maintenance issues, given the thermal bridging nowadays with that, what are your thoughts about that type of?
I'm going to say you learn by experience. And there are some great things in those projects. I mean, the sort of sense of daring, you know, really pushing it, I think was something that was really of its time, quite out there. I was thinking when I was looking at the examples that you put up there, you know, what did we actually, you know, why did we do that, and what did we learn from it? And I think one thing that you learn from it is the sort of anthropomorphic nature of structures. Because you can see everything working, so you know everything's intention is just so clearly articulated, and things that are in compression are so clearly articulated that you read the thing like a skeleton or like a body, and then that made me think about lots of engineers are quite, you know, they enjoy rock climbing and they enjoy being outdoors, and it's because I think they have a sense of their own physicality, and I think they bring that into their design work, into their engineering quite often. So I think those projects, you know, for all of their failings, they had a lot going for them in terms of just the clarity of the expression of the engineering, at least in terms of the structures and the materials, not so much in terms of necessarily some of the other, let's say, particularly time-related aspects. So yeah, so that'd be the answer to that. I'm going to ask you one about the outdoors. Because I know you love the outdoors. So I just would like to know, what is it about the outdoors which is something that is it's obviously so close to your heart, but what is it that you take from that you use in your working life? Yeah,
I think at the heart of it is just it's adventure, and particularly if you're exploring new trails, right? If you go to the same place over and over again, it's nice too, but to explore new trails and knowing that, I find every time you go in the outdoors, there's something new that you experience, be an encounter with an animal or seeing this rainbow in a remote valley that you're all there by yourself, and this rainbow appearing, or just observing animal life and plant life and some challenges too, right? Like some of the difficult climbing challenges and that. It's just adventure, and I love the adventure on the engineering side. I don't know if I would have remained a structural engineer if we were just consigned to calculation. There's this really, for those of you that know the German language, they call the structural engineer, call it a statiker in Germany. And there's another that relates to sort of statics, right? And it relates more to calculation work. And yet the structural engineering role should be much more than that. And there is another word in the German languages that calls the structural engineer a Tragwerksplaner, which has more the sense of a structural designer, a structural planner, where you're more holistically involved in the building design, right? This is what I was trying to point out to you before. Just looking at the building holistically and saying, can we contribute more than just sizing up some beams and columns? Like, I don't think I would have stuck in this business a long time. It was just that. So this adventure of like exploring, avenues of design where you really are participating with the architect, not to usurp the architect of their role, but just to get more deeply involved is I don't know, that's the joy of engineering. And yeah, it certainly is. The adventure side in the outdoors has driven me to adventure in the indoors.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what I'm seeing in both of your questions, but both of your responses as well, is that that common theme of new, looking for things that are new, always thinking about different things, not sort of being complacent, which is really interesting. So we're going to turn to some attendee or audience questions. Thank you for those that have submitted them, and please keep them coming. One of the lovely things about this event is that it seems to have appealed to a broad audience. So we have about a third students, graduates, and young engineers, about a third members and fellows, and about a third who may not be members but are supporters from our built environment community. So I'll start with the first question, which is, we're now in the 5th year of running and growing our own engineering practice, structural and civil. What would you offer as the single most important piece of advice in growing a business and increasing project sizes?
Right. Yeah. I think the first thing to say is you've got to have the courage of your convictions. You know, there's no point in just repeating what other people are doing, at least in my book. You have to find your own way. And if you do that, there's a fighting chance that you'll discover something which other people aren't doing, or they're maybe not doing in the same way. And that appeals to a particular sort of client. It might appeal to people who might want to come and work for you. So I'd say I wouldn't dissociate what you're doing in engineering from the rest of your life. I think it's really important to join them together. I mean, not obviously don't do engineering at home all the time, but definitely join, have the same philosophy in both. And I think that if you do that and true to yourself and have the courage of your convictions, something will come up. And I suppose if it doesn't come up, then you take a moment out of there, and you things go up and down. And when it goes down a bit, you take a bit of time for reflection and then go again and again. And, we've had in our business, I'd love to say it's been just a continuous, amazing rise upwards and nothing but success. But actually, of course, it's very rocky. We're bouncing around like everybody, large or small. So you've got a great chance to find your own way if you're doing your own business. So I say well done as well, because it's a brave thing to do. You learn a hell of a lot as well, because you learn about running a business rather than running a project, which is a completely different animal.
Wonderful. Thank you. Paul, did you have anything you wanted to sort of add?
Yeah, happily, yeah. I think just focusing on the small opportunities that come along at the beginning, and trying to explore, is there maybe a little bit different way of doing this, or just even if it's just straight up like non-exposed, cost-efficient structural design, like just coming up with clever ways to frame a building. We started off doing single-family homes, like we just design one beam in a home, or maybe the foundation, put a bit of rebar in the basement foundation or something. The city started requiring more engineering work because the houses were getting bigger and bigger, the spans were getting a bit bigger. But we cut our teeth in that stuff, and just tried to prove ourselves in those small things. And then you get another commission, and it's a little bit bigger, and then sniffing around again, is there something we can do here that is maybe a little bit different? And so just being faithful, if you like, in those really small projects, and eventually I think there's a very good chance that it'll lead to bigger ones. You do have to have the opportunity. We had the opportunity of also working with one or two architects here in Vancouver. I think in the UK there was lots of them that really had high aspirations for really good design. In Vancouver we have lots of good architects too, but the ones that were interested in exposed structure, there was 2 or 3. And we happened to just grow up as engineers at a time when they were also growing up as architects. And it was just a wonderful collaboration. And so you have to have architects that want to go with you. if that's not the case, then it gets a little bit more difficult. So seek out the young ones that are risers and that are really keen and eager to, that have a due respect for structure. Yeah, that would be my first thought.
This might lead on to our next question about bridging that. Do you think potentially that the new wave of architects, rather than focus on architecturally exposed structure, might be the ones that are focused on regenerative design and lower carbon buildings? You think that's potentially where our next opportunity as engineers is to really kind of thrive and grow from a business perspective?
I mean, maybe I'll just take that. I mean, the thing about regenerative design is it's discipline agnostic. So, it's not structures or mechanical engineering or architecture or even money. It's across everything. It's like design. Being regenerative is an attitude. It's a way of doing things, and you can use that philosophy on all your projects. So I think there's an opportunity for people who have a structural mindset to really push the regenerative aspects of it in terms of what you're doing, because we're so influential in terms of the use of materials, in terms of our embodied footprint, the footprint that we are responsible for through our design work and actually for the operation of the work that we do. I think that so there's a chance for engineers who have a regenerative mindset and really want to make a critical difference. That little slide I showed, which says go for the middle ground, I think that's where really, if you wanted to look at it at a planetary perspective, you put your very best people in the middle and say, right, extend your influence as far as possible, because that's where you can do the most good. Don't stay out on the fringes doing, too many glory projects, because that's not where the planet is paying attention. And so I think it also goes back to Matt's question just now, actually, that, there's a chance for engineers to exercise disproportionate influence because of the impact that we can have beneficially if we don't overuse or badly use materials and energy. Great place to be. Great.
So a couple of questions and moving into the future of engineering, and then I'll come back to a couple of specifics about your strengths and how to develop them. The first is, I guess, a little bit more high level. Knowing the future challenges, the climate change emergency, what do you foresee the most critical issues will be in the next 15 years? What can we do professionally to inspire and maintain enthusiasm?
You got to answer that, Paul.
Yeah. I think you just have to continue to lead with good design. That really looks at and take the holistic approach. Looking at structure, not just from a pure sizing point of view, but what further role can it play, including playing to what role can it play in terms of reducing carbon too. Just leading by good example is my best thought on that. Be a good example.
I think to add to that, I think that so what sort of good example could a engineering literate person set, and how could they use that knowledge wisely? I think there's a chance for structural engineers to be in the vanguard. And in fact, actually, if you look at what the IStructE through Will Arnold and the Climate Action Group are doing, they're doing amazing stuff that's ahead of most other institutions in terms of the way that they're tackling this. And they're providing tools which are enabling engineers to really be active in this space with great positive impact that even 5 years ago we weren't doing. It's very short because you've had committed people working on it. And I think there's an opportunity looking forward 15 years to say, well, does the structural engineering profession need to stop being a shrinking violet and actually start looking out a bit and saying, right, okay, where can we put that knowledge that we could really make an impact? We might not call it structural engineering at the moment, it might be something else. But where can we, an understanding of systems, an understanding of communication, an understanding of the effects of time on things, an understanding of the climate, an understanding of the weather, the wind, all that stuff. I think there's a place where the structural engineers in the next 15 years should be, not might be, I think should be much more influential. We should branch out from the traditional structural world, which is going to be increasingly automated, and we should focus on where the synthesis and the weaving together of that insight can do the most good. And architects do a different thing mostly, so if you're talking about the relationship between engineers and architects, there's a definite place where structural thinking can grow in a way which helps the built environment in the round, for sure.
So that's your sort of specialist generalists.
Yeah. T-shaped people, I suppose. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can see things a little more specialist. Like I can't help but be overwhelmed by the amount of code knowledge you have to possess nowadays for all the different materials, just how they've grown in detail, and then also like having to deal with the computer side of things, the hardware and the software, and it's so easy to get caught up on one of those tracks, and you do have to have specialists in those fields too.
Yes.
But somehow the thing still has to turn into adventuresome design, and adventure is associated with risk too, risk taking. And I think the codes are maybe constricting us more and more. They're absorbing so much of our time and our thinking that this is sort of freewheeling thinking, saying, hey, how can we maybe explore a different path in this design here that may be embracing new technology? I think it's incumbent upon us as engineers to embrace new technology too. When there's new products coming out, new ways of doing things, it often involves some risk. And we have to be willing to embrace that, I think, if we're really going to live up to our calling as engineers. It's not risk free. So we have to manage risk, but it's not risk free.
Yeah, you're right. It's not risk free. We have a couple of questions here on your take on kind of emerging materials as well, but I feel like in some senses you've answered that. In terms of the approach that both of you would take. So given we have probably just about 8 minutes left, I'm going to move on to a couple of other questions. Here is one about education. So do you think university education could modernize and use the tools to teach in ways you have experienced imaginative design? For example, do a travel walkthrough of stone structures, ask students, why does this work? And then go and figure it out. The kind of the maths, physics, materiality properties, asking and helping students to think about why things work and how, I guess. And I guess the question goes on to say, modernization could be using technology to view the travel experience and then digest, what they're looking at.
Do you want to answer that, Paul?
Yeah, I think like in terms of educational, I think instead of being siloed in the university classroom, to go and travel, like you said too, Chris, the inspiration you got from traveling, the inspiration we got from traveling, visiting you there in 1994, as well as many leading architects, the Grimshaws and the Rogers and the Fawcett's. We didn't meet all the senior partners there, but we did meet partners in the firms. And over, Renzo Piano's office and Schleichbergum. And I mean, it was just this travel and seeing the buildings and having them described to us by the architects and engineers. It was hugely inspirational, and from an educational point of view, I know that in the architectural faculty, on that education track, they do their, trips to different places, right? And, just embed themselves in a different culture for a while. I think we should be doing that as engineers too, just going on inspirational trips. Maybe we were looking at planning just pre-COVID, looking at planning a nervy structure field review or field trip, looking at all the nervy design structures over in Italy. That can have a huge impact on a young career, on a developing career. So
to add to that, I think that the challenge one of the challenges in education is to find the right question to answer, and which is driven by the context. And so I don't think that the traditional engineering education has got very long to live. I think it's already changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. It's changing even faster. And the reason I don't think it's going to stay as it is because the balance is completely wrong between, let's say, traditional analytical techniques, which are increasingly automated, and more contextual questions, which start to say, I'm not going to rely on somebody else, or we're not going to rely on somebody else to frame the question. We're actually going to try and understand the context properly so we can actively participate upstream in framing the question in the first place. Then we can use all these amazing tools to respond to it. But if you get the wrong question, you can have a beautifully designed, beautifully analyzed structure, which is completely and utterly useless because it's answering the wrong question. So I think that the educational model for structural engineering, and probably the profession of structural engineering, needs to become more contextualized. Not be afraid of putting the structures into their context all the time. And that's where it has to go. If you want to do proper regenerative design, it's based on the place, and based on providing for the future. It's not something which you can just transplant out of a computer and dump it anywhere on the planet. It's much more contextual and conditional, and it has a lot of stakeholders, both human and natural, who are need to be able to participate, and we need to find a way of communicating with those people and those creatures so that we can actually design something that's useful for them.
Great, thank you. So moving on, we have 2 more questions to finish. The first one is for Chris. I'm totally inspired by your writing. I've read your articles. How do you write so well? Is this a learned skill, or does it come naturally to you?
You wouldn't believe it. Paul, he writes very, very, very well, and it's really hard. I mean, I used to do a column in Building Magazine, and you had to do 800 words, and it used to take me a day to write 800 words. I mean, it's really it's easy to write 3,500 words, but to get it down to 800 and actually say what you wanted to say in a way that people might actually want to read is really difficult. And I'm no expert at that, but I love the process of any artistic process, like painting or music or writing or any of that stuff. I think it's just fascinating to experiment, have a look at what you've done and say, I can do better than that, and have another go and try and refine it. And with a piece of writing, although it's very difficult, I find it very difficult, I really enjoy it, because when you do get to the end and you sort of read it through and you go, I managed to find 3 words in the middle of that article that actually just captured exactly what I wanted to say. It makes you chuckle. I think it's a lot of hard work, but the reward is rewarding. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And just to finish off, one for Paul. The office of Paul looks great with all those certificates and awards. And the view, quite inspiring location to work in. And even the workplace of Chris looks great too. So do you feel that workplace plays a major role in creativity for the structural engineer, or is it only for the architect, as structural engineers will mostly be lost in numbers?
Yeah, well, firstly, all these certificates here, that doesn't necessarily make it for an inspiring workplace. And I should actually just turn my screen around here so you can't see those. But more importantly, like we developed our own office building here, just started prior to COVID and finished it through COVID. And it's west facing. We have ample daylight, and we have this hybrid, like wood and steel combined. I think whereas you can't measure how much it'll influence work performance, but man, it is, when I walk into offices now that are closed with suspended ceiling, minimal daylight, I am so thankful and grateful and happy that we're working a space here that is just flooded with daylight and some wood and some steel and some drywall exposed, just mixing the different materials. It's fantastic, yeah. So I think it definitely can play a role. How much is hard to say, right? But it can only help, and I'd encourage it for every office, yeah. Just not neglecting that side of things.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the office. It's very kind of you to say this used to be a double garage. This room with cars in it, but I like working anywhere apart from here, or anywhere apart from indoors. Actually, I love walking around and through the city or through the woods or up a mountain, whatever. And things just pop into your head under those circumstances when you're thinking about something else or doing something else. So I think the problem with an office, or even though it's lovely, is that it's sort of it's not very liberating. Maybe other people have a different take on it, but for me, I like to be in a moving.
Good, thank you. We're going to wrap up now, and I want to finish by first of all thanking all of you, and of course thanking the audience, because without all of you we wouldn't have an event. And one of the things that I've kind of learned through my presidency is it's not necessarily that people remember everything you say. I hope they will, but certainly they might remember one thing or how they felt about the event. So I'd like to ask each of you to leave one tangible thought or piece of advice or action for our audience to take away from today that is purposeful engineering, something they can do, something that they may not have known, or if you're stuck, why choose to be an engineer today?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. Fire away, Chris.
Okay. I'm going to say, in a nutshell, join in. I think it's we've got to recognize that engineering and life are the same thing. You've only got one shot at it, and
yeah, right. I would just say just be willing to explore and explore and ask. Is a different way to do things. One of the things that's generating a lot of enthusiasm here in offices. We started a lab downstairs, a workshop. We got a testing RAM. We got a 6-axis robot cutting arm, and we just make prototypes. We could test things, and it just just always trying to stay on the leading edge and exploring new avenues of design. It just adds a lot of excitement, but it's just part of the exploration, right? Just be willing to explore and always ask, is there a better way, a different way to do things? And that will bring a lot of joy to us, but also to other people that we serve as clients.
I love that. Thank you. And I think ending on that note of joy through engineering is something that I believe we don't talk about enough, but it's one of the most satisfying parts of our career is bringing joy to people and to ourselves through the process. So thank you for that reminder.